Hello and welcome to Decoding Xenophobia and Racism in the 2020 campaign ads. My name is Zach and I work at America's Voice, where one of our many projects has been tracking campaign ads that use racist and xenophobic dog whistles. In this series, we usually take one distinct dog whistle being employed in the 2020 campaign ads and break down the coded racist and xenophobic message. But today we're going to take a quick step back and look at the last 3 years and see how this dog whistle strategy has continued to backfire. But first, what is a dog whistle and why were campaigns making them a central part of their ads? In his book, Dog Whistle Politics, Ian Andy Lopez defines a dog whistle as a, quote, strategic manipulation of racial ideas for the pursuit of power and material wealth, end quote. Meaning dog whistles trade in racist ideas, explicitly avoiding naming race directly, but invoke negative racial stereotypes that the viewer reacts often without making conscious connection of the racist message. Campaigns and candidates use dog whistles as an electoral strategy to divide voters along racial lines, to vote their fear of the non-white other, distracting them from the lack of real solutions that would improve their own lives. Many Republicans appeared to believe that Donald Trump pulled out a surprise electoral win because of his aggressive use of xenophobic dog whistles, attacking non-white immigrants. So in the elections that followed, many campaigns tried to replicate that strategy. We will see examples of these ads today and discuss how voters reject the poison pill of racism in these messages, showing this strategy to be a loser. Joining us today to discuss this history is Frank Sherry, our Executive Director at America's Voice. To begin, let's rewind the clock to 2017. Frank, I know you were paying particular attention to the elections in Virginia, where their governor's race was the first test in the divide and distract playbook, and to see if that was the strategic winner that the Trump believed it to be. Ed Gillespie was the eventual Republican nominee, fully embraced that strategy in the general election. Can you remind us a bit about what was going on in that race?
Sure. So Ed Gillespie is not known as an anti-immigrant firebrand. He was a pro-immigration reform Bush Republican until he ran for governor in Virginia in 2017 after Trump won with his xenophobic narrative. And what happened in the primary is that Gillespie was pitted against Corey Stewart, who is an anti-immigrant firebrand, and it pushed Gillespie to the right. And then because Gillespie was behind going down the stretch to a Democrat named Ralph Northam, he was encouraged by his consultants and by people like Steve Bannon, consigliere of Trump's 2016 campaign, to really go hard right. And so he did. He ran these MS-13 ads that featured Salvadorans from a Salvadoran prison in El Salvador with tattoos and menacing looks, and basically said, if Ralph Northam gets elected, you know, your streets are going to be overrun by people like this. And Steve Bannon was very happy when Gillespie did that right before the election. He said that Corey Stewart is the reason Gillespie is going to win. It's embracing Trump's agenda as personified by Corey's platform. This was not a competitive race until 4 weeks ago. You could have stuck a fork in Gillespie. And I remember watching Morning Joe the day before the election, and all of the pundits on the panel predicted that Gillespie would win because of his advertising campaign featuring MS-13.
Let's take a quick look at some of those clips from those ads where Gillespie was really blowing that xenophobic dog whistle.
MS-13's motto is kill, rape, control. This violent gang has been tied to brutal murders across Virginia. Ralph Northam's policy? Northam cast the deciding vote in favor of sanctuary cities.
13 is a menace. Yet Ralph Northam voted in favor of sanctuary cities that let dangerous illegal immigrants back on the street.
So Frank, help us understand a little bit more about, what you're seeing when you rewatch these ads.
So first, for those not familiar with Virginia, there's no sanctuary cities in Virginia. This was not an issue. They had some sort of vote that the Republican legislature had put forward to try to make it an issue so that Northam could get hit with ads like this. And Gillespie complied. I mean, the idea that the biggest issue facing Virginia in 2017 was a group of people who were in prisons in El Salvador is preposterous. I mean, clearly this is a Willie Horton style ad saying that the brown people want to kill you, vote for me and I'll keep you safe. The Democrats are soft and weak and permissive and the Republicans are strong. It's a Southern strategy, classic wedge issue approach that we've seen for the last 60 years.
Yeah, I mean, Yeah, this campaign also spent really good money, putting these ads on television. In the campaign, this is where they're diverting their resources. And really, what are they trying to say? I mean, they're really not offering much of a path forward for any Virginians, but really only creating the violent specter of the non-white other. And, we've seen these ads backfire on Gillespie, who ended up losing the race by 9 points. And I know there was a lot of polling going around this issue that really showed that backlash. So Frank, what did you take away from the polling and this race?
Well, it was the first major race after Trump won. And of course, all of the punditry and the analysts were saying, wow, this racism and xenophobia had more traction with voters than we thought. And so here's Gillespie, a pro-immigration Bush Republican, running hardcore Willie Horton style MS-13 ads. And of course, they thought it's going to work again, as did Steve Bannon. He lost by 9 points. He got walloped. And so in our election eve polling that we conducted with Latino Decisions, we were analyzing what happened. And what happened was amazing. The ads backfired. There was a backlash. Young voters turned up in record numbers and voted against Gillespie. African-American voters who are hip to racism, given our long history of white supremacy in this country, rejected it, and young African-Americans turned out in record numbers. Latino and Asian American voters turned out in record numbers, particularly in Northern Virginia. And then finally, the most kind of startling result, surprising result from my point of view, was that white suburban voters, who were the object of these dog whistle ads, they rejected it and they revolted against it. The intensity of middle of the road white voters was so surprising. And in the end, that's why Gillespie lost. Gillespie's reach for the racism and xenophobia is what killed him.
2017 provided some really early tangible evidence that this strategy was a loser, right? And then we saw the elections in 2018, which really only provided more evidence to this case. Then we saw the special election in Pennsylvania's 18th district for U.S. House that really was a preview of what was to come in the midterm elections later that year. So just wanted to show a couple clips from that race.
Lamb worked in the Obama administration that encouraged sanctuary cities, which put illegal immigrants who commit crimes back on the street. Now Connor Lamb wants to help Nancy Pelosi give amnesty to millions of illegal immigrants.
Really, what did you take away from that race as well? I mean, there were some particular things going on in that race. And what did it kind of foreshadow, or what did you kind of think about it as you led into the midterms that November?
Yeah. Well, the Virginia race was one thing, but after all, that was a state that Hillary Clinton had won, even if it was close. Northam won, he doubled her margin, the Democrat, but this was a district that Donald Trump had won by 20 points. And Connor Lamb, a very attractive candidate, was running in a district that was Trumpy. And he was being attacked on immigration. So I have to say, I was like, wow, Virginia is one thing, southwestern Pennsylvania is another. Most of the voters were white, non-college voters who had been very attracted to Trump. Connor Lamb won. He responded to the ads. He said, I have a common sense approach. We have 11 million people here. We can try to round them up. That doesn't make much sense. We can try to just wave them all in with amnesty. That doesn't make much sense. But I think we should give people a chance to get in line and apply for status. And if they meet certain criteria, they should be allowed to stay here. He leaned into it. He didn't advertise on it, but he had to respond to these scurrilous attacks. And I thought, boy, if he wins, something is different about the post-Trump election America, where this divisiveness, these attacks on immigrants and attacks on Democrats as too soft, just don't seem to be gaining traction.
And they spent an enormous amount of money on ads that really employed these anti-immigrant dog whistles all throughout 2018 leading up into that election. Just want to kind of do a little refresher here and kind of play some of the clips of what was going on throughout the country and the type of ads that were being run.
And deport criminal illegal aliens. In Albany, Anthony Brindisi voted with Cuomo to give taxpayer-funded benefits to illegals. In Washington, Brindisi would vote with Pelosi to give amnesty to illegal immigrants.
Open borders and criminal illegal immigrants in our communities.
Raped by an illegal given sanctuary in Philadelphia. Matt Cartwright supports and voted to give illegals amnesty.
David supports an extreme agenda that would put families at risk. Davids would stand with Pelosi to oppose tougher border security. And Davids wants to eliminate ICE, the law enforcement agency that deports criminal illegal aliens.
Opposes the border wall and supports free health care for illegal immigrants. So liberal, Kirkpatrick attacked ICE, undermining the law enforcement agency that keeps us safe.
Frank, really what stood out to you about some of these ads in 2018 and moving a little bit further?
Well, let's also recall that Trump had nationalized the midterm elections by relentlessly scaring Americans, or trying to scare Americans, about the caravans that were coming from Central America and the violence that was going to be coming. He was even talking about terrorists. He tried to run an ad that was so offensive that even Fox News wouldn't run it.
A dangerous caravan of illegals careens to the border, 2 more behind it, and liberal Tom Wolf is laying out the welcome mat.
Illegal aliens invade America, and Tim Kaine and the Democrats encourage it.
Refugees or invaders, they're testing our president, and they're testing America. President Trump is securing our borders and cracking down on the illegal alien invasion.
The 7,000 migrant caravan crossing Mexico, marching toward our border.
We had moved so far beyond any kind of semblance of a dog whistle policy debate. We were into pretty pure racial incitement from the president and by many GOP candidates. So in many respects, the 2018 midterms became a referendum on whether xenophobia and racism would work to turn out voters that supported Republicans and either peel off or depress the vote from Democrats. As we know, didn't happen. Trump wanted to keep the attention on caravans so that the Democratic thrust about how Republicans wanted to take away health care and not protect people with pre-existing conditions would be drowned out. Democrats stayed very strong. He didn't want to debate the tax cut that had given trillions of dollars to the 1% and left most Americans, even many who had voted for him, without much of anything. And so Trump's attempt to say, this is the issue that this election is going to be decided on, it actually broke through in the media. It didn't break through with voters. And no surprise, the day after the election, the so-called caravan threat evaporated from our news coverage and from reality. Yes, Trump's appeal to white power and to racial grievance does turn out more of his core supporters than normally would turn out. And it mobilized a multiracial majority in opposition to the divisiveness, the racism, and the nativism. A remarkable finding. So in the House vote in 2018, which is essentially a popular vote since everybody gets to vote across the country, 8.4% margin, Democrats over Republicans. Hillary Clinton won the popular vote by 2.1%, a 4 times increase in the margin of victory for Democrats. 40 House seats flipped. The Democrats took control of the House of Representatives. State legislatures flipped. So what we found, again, with the kind of election eve polling that allowed us to dig deep with our friends at Latino Decisions and many civil rights groups that worked with us on it, was once again that Trump's appeal to divisiveness, to racism, to grievance backfired more than it mobilized. And as a result, while of course many voters were voting on a range of things, healthcare, accountability, stop Trump, climate, race relations, you name it. But the fact that Trump made it about the caravans and so many GOP candidates spent so many tens of millions of dollars to make it about immigration, and the country said, sorry, we don't like the cruelty, we don't like the divisiveness, we don't like the racism. Democrats won in a stunning defeat. In fact, midterm elections have been tracked since the early 1900s. This was the largest margin in history.
despite, really these losses and, what really is like dangerous rhetoric coming from these campaigns, they really have doubled down that strategy and did so even in 2019. And we saw gubernatorial races in red states like Louisiana and Kentucky both continue to make xenophobic dog whistles really a central part of their campaign ads in 2019 as well. And I'll just play a short clips here from some of those ads that we saw in Kentucky and Louisiana.
Right now, John Bel Edwards is wasting millions on benefits for illegal immigrants, and he refuses to ban sanctuary cities.
Free taxpayer-funded benefits to illegal immigrants. Edwards even opposed efforts to ban funding for sanctuary cities.
Nothing is more important to me than my children's safety. That's why I voted for President Trump, and it's why I want a governor who's tough on illegal immigration.
I've seen how illegal immigration is destroying families by bringing heroin into our communities.
Andy Beshear would allow illegal immigrants to swarm our state.
These ads clearly didn't deliver, with Matt Bevin in Kentucky losing the governor's mansion in a state that Donald Trump carried by 30 points in 2016, and then Eddie Risponi, who lost Louisiana. So really, like, these are really, Louisiana, Kentucky, these aren't, these are pretty deeply red states. So like, what do these examples kind of tell you moving forward as we move into 2020?
I think it shows that American voters, even in red states, are more interested in their lives than in racial dog whistles. The people in Louisiana and Kentucky are interested in their health care and whether they're going to keep it or not. They're interested in wages. They're interested in housing. They're interested in employment prospects. And here come the Republicans saying, I'm going to be tough on illegal immigration, and they're not. In a sense, it becomes a caricature or a parody of itself, is that they want to do anything but talk about the kitchen table issues because the GOP has been so weak on kitchen table issues, while they want to talk about racially, what they think are racially incendiary issues, a well-worn pattern, the Lee Atwater's Southern strategy of using race as a dog whistle to try to get white suburban voters to vote Republican and to get white working class voters to vote for Republican, even if it's not in their economic interest. In Kentucky and in Louisiana, the dog whistle backfired.
You've already seen some of the ads that are going on here in 2020. And so kind of like help us walk through here, like what would you might suggest to others take away when they start to see ads that are similar to the ones that we saw today?
You're right. It's the same old playbook. I think it's a sign of their weakness. But that's all they've got is racism, xenophobia, and divisiveness. When we were asked by friends who are in politics, what should we do to respond to this? There's a couple of options. One option is to lean right into it and say, what they're saying about immigration is wrong. What we need to do is get away from the cruelty and the divisiveness of Trump's agenda, one that separates families and puts young immigrants called dreamers on a path to deportation. And what we need to do is to solve the problem, come together, make sure that we have a functioning system that's fair to all, make sure that there's a line to get into so that immigrants without papers can apply for status and be able to turn their Americanness into a formal recognition of being an American. That's what Connor Lamb did. That's what many Democrats have done in tough races. The other option is to say, they're talking about immigration because they want to distract you from the fact that they want to take your health care away. They don't care that your wages haven't gone up in 4 decades, and they want to continue the kind of corruption that Donald Trump is infamous for. That kind of let's not be distracted from the kitchen table issues also works. So there's really a couple of options for people. We always like it when candidates lean in and say what they're for and that they want to solve the immigration challenges because it's long overdue. What's important is that the hundreds of millions of dollars that have been spent by the GOP to arouse anti-immigrant animus in America has failed. The project has failed. In fact, Gallup just came out with a poll recently where they asked, how do you think immigration is good for the country or bad for the country? And what should we do about immigration levels? In the midst of a pandemic, when unemployment is over 10%, they have never found such high support for immigration as a good thing and for increasing legal immigration. That is a remarkable response to Trump's wielding of divisiveness the American people, a majority, have decided we don't want your kind of politics. We want the kind of governance that brings us together to solve problems.
Well, that's some good news to end on. So that'll do it for us today. But if you want to help decode racism in the dog whistle ads like we saw today and undermine this political strategy, share this video with a family member, friend, or coworker, and like and subscribe to the channel to see our next Decoding Dog Whistle video.